see a thing through the barrier. He could only passively defend himself against the constant bombardment of the 5 yuan elemental energies, consuming the divine energy in his body to protect his divine body and soul from harm. Asura, who was about to step into the battle, had his astonishment renewed as he discovered that Salas was not invincible to the pandemonium. Gazing from high above the sky, he saw Salas suddenly sat cross-legged inside a region filled with brilliant lights. He was wearing a grave expression as though he was in deep trouble. Asura did not expect that the pandemonium could pose a real threat to Salas. After seeing the sudden change in the situation, Asura halted on his path and decided to not rush to be the hero. He again concealed himself and continued to observe the battle. Salas has fallen into a formation designed to exhaust the enemy's energy. He is being blasted by the yuan energies that the pandemonium has been gathering. Inside the Great Formation, he cannot use the lightning energy in the environment and is forced to utilize his divine energy to defend himself, explained Han Mu to the party. I'm sure that before Salas could escape from the formation, more than half of his troops would have died. That is the price for trying to invade the pandemonium, said Han Huo. Han Jin sighed and instructed Rose and the party, please get ready, it seems that we will have to evacuate the pandemonium after all. Sai, I wonder how father is doing and why he hasn't returned yet. Isn't Salas still trapped in the formation? Why do we have to evacuate? Asked the confused Rose. Yeah, look at Sala's grave expression. It's clear that he's in great pressure. It might be able to trap him indefinitely. Raman also did not understand why they were asked to evacuate. If the pandemonium has existed for hundreds, or maybe thousands of years, the formation could keep Salas trapped until he exhausted all his energy. But alas, the pandemonium was built just 2 years ago, and it had only managed to accumulate a tiny amount of yuan energies. The energy accumulated so far could only hold Salas for half an hour, at most, explained Han Jin disappointedly. There's nothing more that we can do. In half an hour, the yuan energies in the pandemonium would be exhausted and most of the formations would stop functioning. But as long as we are alive, there is hope. We will take revenge when father reemerges, said Han Tu before he turned to Goron and instructed, I will open a tunnel that goes 100 meters deeper into the ground. Ask your men to get ready to evacuate. Following Han Jin and Han Tu's explanations, Ramen, Rose, and the others no longer had any doubts. The 5 elite zombies, as the co-architects and builders of the pandemonium, knew the demonic formations inside out. Rose realized the gravity of the situation after hearing their explanation. Okay, right away, replied Goron before he hastily left the command center. Sai, it's been many months. Why hasn't there been any news about father yet? Sighed Han Shui. He knew that if Han Shu was at the pandemonium, using the yuan energy available and the thousands of demon generals in the cauldron of myriad demon, Salas would likely never step out of the Great Formation. Father will return, and when the time comes, humph, it will be the death of Salas, said Han Huo, gnashing his teeth. The 5 of them had taken a ton of effort and energy to build the pandemonium. They felt very reluctant to abandon the valley, knowing that it will soon be destroyed by Salas. Everyone, get ready, we are leaving soon, said Han Mu as he gestured around. Then, suddenly, his mind jolted. He closed his eyes and carefully sensed for a moment before he opened his eyes in alarm. He shouted, evacuate immediately. There is a very powerful life aura hiding nearby, and he is no weaker than Salas. Not just Rose, Ramen, and Zavik, but even the other 4 elite zombies were terrified to hear that news. Facing one sovereign was bad enough. 2 sovereigns would be disastrous. There had been many rumors about Salas spreading around the fringe. One of the hearsays told that Salas had gone to Log and Wasir, and the sovereigns had reached a certain agreement. Rose and the others, who had heard of this rumor, automatically assumed that the mighty being in hiding was one of the 2 sovereigns. Evacuate immediately, or we will suffer great casualties, shouted Han Tu as he pointed to a deep dark tunnel under his feet. Wait, Han Mu shouted again with one hand raised, gesturing the party to halt. Han Mu turned still and closed his eyes. Everyone in the room froze and stared at him in pin-drop silence. After a while, Han Mu opened his eyes again and said to the party in a puzzled face, "It is Asura." He just cast his soul energy towards the valley, wanting to know if Father is here. I have acquired a connection with him, and he said he will help us fight Salas. Do you think he can be trusted? Han Mu cultivated the energy of life and possessed a wonderful connection with all trees and plants in the pandemonium. His soul was also vastly different from that of an ordinary life energy cultivator. Therefore, Han Mu could sense Asura's soul and communicate with soul transmission. Outside the pandemonium, Asura was again surprised. When he first received a reply of soul transmission, he thought that Han Shuo was hiding in the pandemonium. The soul energy he cast towards the valley was very faint. No one should be able to detect the very minute energy undulation, save for another expert of his class. But when Asura received the soul message asking, "Who are you?" he instantly realized that the being he detected wasn't Han Shuo. He had met Han Shuo once and knew that Han Shuo's soul felt much more sinister and dark, vastly different from Han Mu's energetic and jolly soul. The two communicated using their souls, and Asura revealed his intention. He did not expect that Han Shuo would have an expert with such great soul-sensing ability. This made him even more determined to help those in the pandemonium. "Asura?" Zavik raised one brow and explained, "Master once had a meeting with him in the Omphalos. He also gifted Master one of his sovereign shops. He seemed determined to befriend us. If this sovereign would step up for us, we might not need to evacuate. But, can he be trusted?" Han Mu seemed skeptical. He asked, "What's his reputation like in the fringe?" He's relatively low profile, and of the 5 sovereigns, Asura is the most polite. I think he is sincere in helping us," replied Zavik. "We cannot take this risk." "Proceed with the evacuation," said Han Jin after he thought for a moment. "Little Wood, tell Asura that we are evacuating. If he really wants to help us, stop Salas from destroying the pandemonium." "Got it." Han Mu closed his eyes and communicated with Asura. A dozen seconds later, Han Mu opened his eyes and smilingly said, "Asura agreed. Let's go." The party was rather perplexed. They did not understand why Asura would take so much effort to help them. However, as they were in a hurry, they did not discuss the topic. The Pandemonians began flying into the underground tunnel that Han Tu made. Inside a mountain range, several thousand miles from the Empyrean peak, was a piece of flaky dry land. Just months ago, the land was saturated with water and sludgy. Any beasts or humans that accidentally stepped on it would sink into the mud. But now, the land was as dry as bone. Under the cold night sky, strange cracking noises started playing from under the ground. Moments later, there was an explosion. As though a stick of dynamite was planted under the ground and ignited, dirt was sent flying in every direction, and a crater was formed. A majestic, masculine naked figure was revealed as the dust settled. He had a pair of chilling, sinister gazes, but had a faint, amiable smile on his face. He carried a demonic yet bewitching demeanor. He raised his head and gazed at the clear, cold sky and said to himself, "Although the realm state is not stable, and I have yet to fully comprehend my new power, it is enough to take care of Salas." Upon finishing those words, Han Shuo shot into the sky and flew towards the Empyrean peak at an unfathomable speed. The Empyrean peak was thousands of miles away, but Han Shuo took just moments to complete the journey. However, Han Shuo discovered that there wasn't a soul on the mountain. He stood on the mountain and thought for a moment. Suddenly, his face jolted, and he immediately rushed towards the pandemonium. Chapter 868, Rushing to the Pandemonium, GDK 868. Rushing to the pandemonium, Han Shuo realized that Salas would do everything within his means to find him, and while doing so, Salas would locate the pandemonium. It would just be a matter of time. Han Shuo had a good understanding of Salas' strength and the defensive power of the pandemonium. The demonic formations in the pandemonium could stall Salas for a while, but it definitely could not kill him. Han Shuo was worried that Rose and the 5 elite zombies who lived in the valley might lose their lives. Therefore, Han Shuo rushed to the pandemonium with all his strength, hoping that he wouldn't be too late to the scene. But Han Shuo had underestimated the intelligence and treacherousness of his 5 kiddos. He also did not expect that Asura would defend the pandemonium for him. While Han Shuo was rushing towards the pandemonium at the speed of light, Sala's troops were being massacred in the valley. It was like a scene from hell. At the center of the pandemonium was a monolith carved with the cauldron's outline. Mysterious lights flowed through the etching like blood through a living organism. When Sala's experts perished, their divine souls would float into the monolith in the form of thin smoke. A soul-gathering formation and a storage formation were deployed on the monolith. It was made so that Cauldron's spirit could collect the divine souls of pandemonium intruders even while he was away. Then, when Han Shuo later returned to the valley, he could collect the souls and process them. With that, those perished souls wouldn't just dissipate and go to waste. Sala's was at that moment wearing a grave expression, still trapped in a demonic formation. The divine energy in his body was being rapidly consumed to defend against the energies bombarding him from every direction. The Yuan energies, which powered most of the demonic formations in the pandemonium, was directed to the formation that trapped Sala's. This caused the lesser demonic formations to fall in their destructiveness, and the pressure faced by those trapped in them was likewise reduced. With that, some of Sala's troops managed to escape death. Under the pandemonium, Goron and his subordinates had left using the emergency escape tunnel that Earth Elite Zombie made. Only the 5 elite zombies, Rose, Ramen, and Zavik had yet to leave. "That's almost everyone. It's our turn to evacuate," remarked Ramen. Han Mu, Han Huo, Han Shui, Han Tu, Han Jin, and Rose were reluctant to leave the valley which they had fallen in love with. This was especially true for the 5 elite zombies who helped in constructing the place. They had truly considered the valley their home. Their hearts ached when they considered the likely scenario that it would soon be destroyed by Sala's. "I think Asura will stop Sala's as he promised. Don't grieve about it, the base will be fine," Zavik consoled the party. "Let's go," sighed Han Tu somewhat melancholically. "If worst comes to worst, we'll just take another 2 years to rebuild it. It's no big deal. Let's move. I hope Asura will keep the place mostly intact," said Han Jin before he stepped into the evacuation tunnel. With nothing else they could do, the remaining pandemonians escaped into the tunnel. The tunnel was sealed, and no one else was present in the pandemonium but Sala's and his troops. 10 minutes later, Sala's heaved a long sigh of relief, for the bizarre energies had suddenly stopped bombarding him. He felt the brief joy of escaping death. Sala's did not know that the pandemonium had only collected a limited amount of Yuan energies, and the formation could not trap him indefinitely. Still, it had used up plenty of Sala's divine energy. At that trend, he would be completely depleted of his divine energy within 5 days. Sala's got on his feet and gazed around. He was surprised to find that most of the demonic formations had stopped operating. He also saw a land filled with the bodies of his troops. Before the assault, the invading force gathered by Sala's was nearly 1,000 gods strong. But after the carnage, less than 300 experts were left alive, most of whom were wounded and exhausted. Sala's had waged countless wars and battles in the fringe for eons, but never had he suffered a defeat as crushing as he did this day. More than half his troops were killed, but he had not even seen the silhouette of Han Shuo, his main objective. He had already lost a great number of his troops to the Empyrean Peak attacks several months ago. Coupled with the losses he suffered today, he had almost no army left. To a sovereign like him, nothing could be more humiliating. "Search the valley, kill anyone you find. Do not leave an ant alive," commanded Sala's with a dark face, determined to exterminate Han Shuo and his people. Those troops of Sala's who were fortunate enough to survive dragged their weary arms and legs and wandered all around the valley warily, attempting to find their enemies and finish them, hoping that it would mollify Sala's. This bizarre valley had annihilated more than half of them, but throughout the invasion, they had not even met a single person of the defenders. The experience had shaken them to the core. Those exhausted survivors took great pains to search every chamber and tunnel there was, but they could not find Rose, the 5 elite zombies, or the other pandemonians who had evacuated the valley. After half an hour of pointless searching, the followers of Sala's returned to their sovereign with their heads drooped. "My lord, there is not a single person. It's empty, nothing valuable is left. My lord, what should we do?" Sala's became so livid that the blood vessels in his brain nearly burst. He took great effort in gathering his followers from all over the fringe to invade the valley. Although he had successfully captured it, his enemy had managed to escape. All those men he sent to death had been for naught. If the outside world were to learn of this, it would be a fatal blow to Sala's reputation. He could start planning his retirement already. "Destroy it, destroy everything. Raze it to nothingness," commanded Salas as he gritted his teeth. By now, even Salas wondered how he should face the world after suffering such humiliation. At this moment, those troops of Salas had flickering lights in their eyes as they gazed at him. They started to suspect that the sovereign that they so trusted might not be as terrifying as they had imagined. He judged the situation poorly and had given erroneous commands that directly contributed to the deaths of their comrades. "I said, destroy everything," bellowed an enraged Salas as though he had read his followers' thoughts. Sala's followers were shocked, and they hastily went back into the pandemonium to execute his orders. "Long time no see, Salas." It was then that Asura slowly walked out from the darkness with an almost mocking smile on his face. Salas squinted and coldly asked, "Asura, why are you here?" "To persuade you," Asura explained. "The owner of this place has spent a considerable amount of resources to build it. He wishes that you will not destroy this amazing valley." Sala's voice grew deeper, and he impolitely replied, "Has your brain been clogged with dirt? Brian's presence in the fringe will only upset the current order we have established for countless years. How could you side with him? Don't tell me that you want to cut out some of your possessions of the fringe and share it with Brian." Asura shook his head smilingly and replied, "Of course not. But it seems to me that Brian isn't interested in us. It's just you who got unlucky." Salas was not in a good mood and couldn't take Asura's sneering. He angrily shouted, "Asura, what exactly do you want? You want to defend that outsider?" "Well, not really. If you had killed Brian, I couldn't care less if you destroy this place. But now, I've promised someone to look after this valley. So please do me the honor and kindly leave without destroying the place," replied Asura in a polite manner. "You short-sighted fool," Salas angrily shouted. "Fine, let's see if you can stop me." Salas rolled up his sleeves, ready to fight. The smile on Asura's face did not fade. He chuckled as he said, "Salas, oh Salas, can't you see that it is very unwise to fight me now? You have spent plenty of your divine energy in the pandemonium, and what little followers you have left can't assist you. You should reconsider your choice. Cut the crap. I'm going to lay this valley to waste. No one can stop me," shouted Salas angrily before he attacked Asura. Sala's troops were incredibly exhausted after barely surviving the demonic formations. Many of them were injured and far from top form. If they were to stand nearby while two overgods fought, they were bound to be severely wounded, if not killed, by the overwhelming stray energies and shockwaves produced. Therefore, those troops of Salas who were prepared to destroy the pandemonium hastily withdrew to a safe distance. Asura saw that a fight was inevitable. Lest the shockwaves destroy the pandemonium as they fought, Asura decided to take it elsewhere. Salas, at this moment, was nearly deranged out of rage. He charged after Asura without thinking. Lightning bolts expanded and filled the sky in an instant before converging towards Asura, who was standing on the ground. In response, Asura congealed two enormous monsters using clouds of dust and intercepted the lightning bolts. Two overgods started fighting near the pandemonium. Deafening explosions shook both the sky and ground constantly. The terrifying lightning and earth energies clashed and destroyed two mountains near the valley in the process. The battle between two overgods would usually take a long time. The two sovereigns were about evenly matched and would take at least 1 or 2 days before a winner might emerge. The other three sovereigns simultaneously felt a major energy undulation. Following their senses, Tyre, Log, and Wasir rushed towards the pandemonium without the slightest hesitation. Chapter 869, A Gathering of Experts GDK 869. A gathering of expert Sala's followers were fleeing from the pandemonium, trying to get as far as possible. The battle between Asosa and Salas had produced tremendous energy fluctuations. As they were overgods with similar strengths, it would take a while before a victor emerged. The terrifying undulation of elemental energies had alerted many of the experts around the fringe. They followed their senses and flew towards the pandemonium, hoping to find out what was happening. The tremendous shockwave shook the earth and penetrated deep underground. Han Tu, who was paving a tunnel for the pandemonians to escape, suddenly stopped moving and closed his eyes to sense. It took him no time to understand what was happening above the pandemonium. Han Tu and the others had begun their evacuation before Asura and Salas started their battle. They were currently under a plane that was hundreds of miles from the pandemonium. It looks like we might not have to flee after all. Han Tu seemed pleasantly surprised by something. He said to Goron, "I'm turning back to take a look. You and your men will stay here for now. Don't worry, I believe Salas is now too occupied to deal with us." "Why? What's happening?" Goron was confused. Although his strength was greater than Han Tu's, his sensitivity to the earth element wasn't as great, and he couldn't sense the minute undulation of the earth element. Salas and Asura are fighting. With Asura's help, Salas will be too busy to trample the pandemonium, explained Han Tu with a big smile before he started flying to the other end of the underground tunnel. Han Tu took no time to reach Han Mu, Han Hu, Rose, and the others who were at the other end. He immediately informed them that Asura and Salas were in a great battle. As they were deep underground and a good distance away from the pandemonium, they were clueless about what was happening above the valley. Not even Han Mu could sense the soul undulation of Asura. They were pleasantly surprised to hear the news from Han Tu and asked synchronously, "Really?" Han Tu nodded affirmatively and explained, "Only an expert at Asura's realm could produce such an intense earth energy undulation when utilizing earth energy. He must be helping us. Then what are we waiting for? Let's turn back and take a look," said Han Huo cheerfully. He too turned around and flew back towards the pandemonium. The battle near the pandemonium produced an extreme amount of shockwaves and explosions. Experts in the vicinity with strength above a certain realm could detect the energy fluctuation. In the entire land of chaos, there were only a few experts who could detect the disturbance from a great distance. Every super-powerful expert who detected the battle between two overgods through the abnormality of elemental energies in the environment put down whatever that they were doing and rushed to the pandemonium. Near a volcanic crater, Han Hao was wearing a calm face while hiding in ambush against a powerful force. The power commanded by Han Hao had substantially increased after he subdued Polo. It had grown to be greater than the majority of powerhouses in the Fringe. Only a few in the Fringe were in command of forces larger than Han Hao's. "What should we do?" Polo, crouching beside Han Hao, asked very softly. Before them was a group of experts who served Sovereign Log. It was led by a late-stage high god of light. They were rather relaxed and not vigilant to their surroundings, as no Fringe dweller dared mess with them, until today. Log was known for his treacherousness in the Fringe. He was no less frightening than the vengeful Salas. Normally speaking, his followers could do whatever they wanted in the Fringe, and no one would even think about attacking them. Even Polo, who had lived in the Fringe for many years, had never thought about attacking a follower of Sovereign Log. Han Hao, however, decided to ambush one right after he agglomerated Polo's faction into his. "Kill," commanded Han Hao without any hesitation. Polo hardened his heart, turned around, and gestured. The god hunters received his command and descended from the volcanic crater. Those followers of Sovereign Log were surrounded and immediately attacked without the chance to engage in inconsequential talks. "We will join hands in killing that guy. This will be a smooth ride once he's dead," exclaimed Han Hao as he pointed at the arrogant-looking high god of light. "Understood," replied Polo. He had learned to follow Han Hao's command without question. Han Hao and Polo emerged, and without uttering a word, they started attacking their target with their full strengths. The high god of light, as expected, tried threatening them with Log. However, Han Hao and Polo ignored his words and finished him in less than half a minute. All his troops were defeated by the god hunters, and their divine energy was devoured. While the god hunters relished in the joy of consuming divine energy, Han Hao suddenly bunched his brows. He raised his head towards the sky and closed his eyes. Moments later, he abruptly opened his eyelids and revealed a pair of sinister glowing eyes. He commanded, "I will give you all 10 minutes before we start moving." "But Chief, that's not enough time for us to devour all their energy," said the confused Polo. 10 minutes, said Han Hao assertively. He seemed rather impatient. Polo had been in contact with Han Hao for some time, but he had never seen him being so impatient. He understood that something major must have happened. With that, he raised no further objection, but commanded his subordinates to make the most of the time. Precisely 10 minutes later, without uttering a word, Han Hao started flying towards the Pandemonium. His troops followed closely behind him. Back at the Pandemonium, the great battle was still ongoing. Asura and Salas did not expect so many experts would gather around them. By now, Asura's purpose in fighting Salas had changed slightly. His goal was no longer just to help Han Shu defend the Pandemonium. Although all 5 sovereigns were overgods, most people would still try to guess which among them was the strongest. To most fringe dwellers, Tyre was known to be the strongest sovereign, while the other 4 were of about the same strength. It was thanks to this preconception that the super experts from all over Elysium would tend to enlist themselves in Tyre's army instead of the other sovereigns. This caused Tyre's power to grow stronger and stronger. If Asura could defeat Salas, then he would have proven to the world that he was stronger than Salas, Log, and Wasir. Then he might be known to the fringe dwellers as possessing strength rivaling that of Tyre. The real reason the 5 sovereigns had been constantly fighting was for reputation. In the land of chaos where might makes right, having a fearsome reputation was very beneficial as it would sway the to-be, fringe dwellers to submit to their rule, growing their power. Salas had squandered the power of faith from billions of his worshippers during the battle against Han Shu a few months back, and he had just used up a good amount of divine energy on the Pandemonium. To Asura, this was the perfect opportunity to defeat Salas and gain greater infamy. Of course, he would not let go of the opportunity. Salas was rather impetuous. If it was Log who was in such a situation, he wouldn't have fought Asura, for it was clear to this treacherous sovereign who knew how to restrain himself that the odds were stacked against him. But Salas cared nothing about these things. His mind was affixed with making retribution. All those who infringed upon his sovereignty must pay back tenfold in blood. For these reasons, it was unlikely that the 2 sovereigns would stop fighting anytime soon. The great disturbance over the Pandemonium had attracted various experts located nearby. However, they dared not get too close to the battlefield, but gazed from a great distance. They could not see the battle clearly and could only determine the battle progress through the fluctuation of elemental energies. Battles between overgods were extremely rare. Most ordinary divine beings would never have the opportunity to witness one in their lifetime. To a high god who wished to further advance to the next realm, this was a once-in-a-blue-moon opportunity. By observing the battle between 2 overgods, they could possibly come to enlightenment and gain a more profound knowledge of those energies, and potentially unravel a few mysteries of the overgod realm. Every late-stage high god expert wanted to break through this nearly insurmountable cultivation hurdle. If they were to reach the overgod realm, they would possess even greater strength, enjoy even greater perks, and gain an even greater following. The temptations were much too strong to resist. Therefore, gods from every region of the fringe had gathered around the Pandemonium to witness the world-shaking battle of 2 overgods. Some stringers had boldly ventured into the Pandemonium and discovered that it was covered with bodies. They sold the news to those gods who gathered near the Pandemonium and made a handsome profit. The fringe dwellers were surprised by what they learned and started discussing it with those around them. All those dead bodies were Sala's followers. Not a single of the perished came from the Pandemonium. Even one without a brain could deduce what the information meant. Those observers suddenly became very curious and on guard towards the Pandemonium. They reminded themselves that they should not offend the Pandemonians unless they wanted trouble too great for them to afford. A day passed, and the battle grew only fiercer. The sky was filled with lightning bolts that slithered all around, while the land was as tumultuous as the sea during a storm. Deafening explosions and powerful shockwaves repeatedly came from the region as lightning and earth energies in different forms would clash at every second. On that day, a fat guy with a faint, harmonious smile appeared above the Pandemonium. His small eyes glittered with astonished lights as he gazed at Asura and Salas, who were fighting in the distance. A high god of death sensed the changes in the energy of death in the environment. Upon raising his head and looking, he cried out in alarm, "It is Sovereign Log. He's here." The crowd simultaneously raised their heads to look in the same direction, and they saw the beaming fatty. Their faces jolted, and they left the area without making a noise, as though afraid of waking a sleeping monster. Chapter 870, Nobody Leaves. GDK 870, Nobody Leaves. Log's arrival had terrified many of the observers. They scurried away to keep a distance from the sovereign. As Log did nothing to deliberately hide the mighty aura on his body, the two battling overgods sensed his presence as soon as he reached the pandemonium. Both Salas and Asura were shocked and grew wary when attacking each other. They were afraid that the treacherous Log might launch a sneak attack on them. Sovereign Wasir arrived a few hours after Log. His arrival caused chilling winds to blow over the pandemonium and the surrounding temperature to drop. When Log and Wasir showed up at the pandemonium, many of the bystanders felt threatened and made a distance from them. While some decided to leave, some hid behind narrow slits on mountain walls and other places to watch the fight. Haha, I couldn't have imagined this, Salas and Asura fighting over a nobody. It seems the fringe has been peaceful for far too long. Everyone's looking for a little excitement, remarked Log with a faint smile as he gazed at the battle. Wasir turned his frigid gaze at Log, who was hovering nearby, and calmly remarked, Asura failed to see the bigger picture. How foolish of him to help an outsider. Log turned to Wasir and beamed. He said, the way I see it, helping that youngster is just an excuse. I reckon his real intention is to show everyone that he's stronger. Upon hearing those words, Wasir groaned and disdainfully said, that's very sneaky of Asura. But if he defeats Salas, are you going to seize the opportunity to fight him? Log seemed stunned. He shook his head and answered, I'm too busy to do that, but it sure sounds like you are interested in doing so. You should go ahead with it. Too busy? Then what do you come all the way here for? Wasir smirked and said, if I were to attack Asura, you will just sit there and watch until we are both injured before jumping in and attacking both of us. Hee hee, nice try, Log. Oh, Wasir, you're being paranoid, replied Log as though wrongfully accused, as though he did not harbor the malicious scheme. Wasir scoffed and said nothing more. The five sovereigns knew each other well, not just in their strengths, but also their personalities. Log was the kind of person who may appear polite and friendly on the surface as he wove his treacherous schemes. But when the time came, when the perfect opportunity presented itself, he would ruthlessly murder without the slightest hesitation. If Log wasn't there, after Salas and Asura were done fighting, Wasir might attack the victor. But with Log there, Wasir dared not rush into action, for he was afraid of ending up becoming Log's victim. While Log and Wasir were chatting, Salas and Asura continued to fight. Salas and Asura were evenly matched in strength. But things changed after Salas had effectively destroyed several of his power of faith supply streams during the battle with Han Shuo. And after Salas exhausted a good amount of his divine energy to the pandemonium. Therefore, at this stage of the battle, Salas had started to show signs of tiring. Asura had been employing defensive measures from the beginning of the battle. He used the tremendous defensive power of the earth energy to neutralize Sala's lightning bolts, wearing down Sala's energy. Then, as the battle went on, when Salas started showing signs that he was getting low in his divine energy reserves, Asura finally turned from defensive to offensive. One was energetic, while the other was exhausted. After many hours into the battle of attrition, Salas finally realized the bad situation he was in. Asura's attacks had become fiercer and fiercer, and Salas started having trouble dealing with it. Slowly but surely, Salas was losing the battle. Most of the bystanders were unable to observe the fight visually. However, they could determine which side had the upper hand by inferring the intensity of elemental energies around them. When the battle started, the environment was flooded with the energy of lightning. Bright flashes of lightning bolts had set the sky ablaze, while the earth energy seemed rather weak. However, as time went by, the spectators noticed that the tide was slowly turning. The lightning energy was growing weaker, while the earth energy was growing thicker. From that, the spectators understood that Salas was losing the battle. They did not know that Asura started the battle with an advantage over Salas, and came to the conclusion that Asura was stronger than Salas. That little observation alone was enough to have a great impact on the sovereigns' careers. From this moment onwards, the unaffiliated ferocious gods from all 12 dominions who stepped into the fringe would choose to serve Asura over Salas, simply because the former seemed slightly stronger. 4 of the 5 sovereigns had gathered above the pandemonium. Only Tyre, the supposedly strongest sovereign, had yet to show up. The battle continued, and soon it was midnight. Salas showed obvious signs of wear and trouble resisting Asura's attacks. However, it seemed as though Salas wasn't going to resign. It seemed as though he had gone nuts and was determined to drag Asura to hell even if it meant his death. Asura, meanwhile, although winning the battle, wasn't feeling the slightest sense of joy. He knew Sala's unreasonable temper, and that Salas was the kind of person who would fight his enemy till the death. If Log and Wasir were not there, Asura might be willing to fight Salas till one of them was dead. However, Asura knew that neither Log nor Wasir were honorable characters. If he were to fight Salas till the end, and even if he ended up winning, he might have to face attacks from Log and Wasir when he was at his weakest. Asura didn't know if he could even escape from the two of them when he would have little energy left. And even if Asura could escape from Log and Wasir, the two of them would know that he was injured and would attack his underground palace without hesitation. They would do all they could to destroy Asura's forces while he hid to recover. This was not an outcome that Asura desired. Therefore, Asura, who was winning the battle, started to grow hesitant. He was feeling even more worried than Salas was. "I don't think we should keep fighting." Asura suddenly retreated to a distance and said to the gasping Salas with a bitter frown, "Wasir and Log are here. If we are to fight to the end, it won't end well for either of us." "Asura, I won't let you off for kicking me while I'm wounded," shouted Salas furiously. Asura jolted, for he thought that Salas was going to stake his life and fight till the end. "But I will let you off for now. I will look for you at your underground palace when I have recovered." Salas coldly groaned after taking a cold glance at the spectating Log and Wasir. Although Salas was impetuous in personality, he was sane enough to tell that he was not in a good position. Log and Wasir still possessed full strength. If he was to keep fighting Asura, in the end, both of them would end up badly injured or dead. "Huh, why have you two stopped fighting?" cried Log, making a fuss about nothing. "The battle isn't over yet. Salas, this isn't how you usually behave. Wasir, and you, Log, have the two of you forgotten what you've promised?" shouted Salas as he glanced angrily at the two sovereigns who had been passively watching the fight. He stared ferociously at Log as he said, "Didn't we have an agreement? Why didn't you assist me?" Log chuckled and replied, "Oh yes, we have agreed to help you, but keep in mind that we only said to help you against the outsider called Brian. We have never promised to help you fight Asura. Hee hee. Besides, I have been friends with Asura for as many years as I have been with you. How could I do something so unfaithful to my friend?" Asura put on a fake smile as he listened to Log's false words. After Log finished talking, Asura smilingly said, "All right, I think it's time we all go home." By now, even Salas felt so ashamed of his failures that he no longer wished to destroy the pandemonium, but to leave the scene as soon as possible. "Just you wait, Asura. I will find you at your underground palace very soon," threatened Salas coldly before he gestured and commanded his troops, "Return to the Empyrean Peak." Those followers of Salas hung their heads dispiritedly. As followers of Salas, their interests were directly impacted by their sovereign's downfall. Those recent months had been absolute shit to them. With so many of their comrades having perished and their sovereign Salas having appeared weaker than Asura, they wondered if they could still live prosperously in the fringe. "Nobody leaves without my permission?" A roar suddenly sounded from a distance. Then, a majestic figure appeared in the blink of an eye, hovering proudly above the pandemonium. "It's you. You have finally shown up." Salas, who was just about to leave, suddenly turned angry. He stared at Han Shuo with great hostility, as though ready to pounce on him. "I said, nobody leaves," shouted Han Shuo coldly before his 17 flying swords whooshed out. Some of those innocent bystanders who had gathered from all over the fringe to watch the fight were trying to flee. A dozen of them were instantly killed by the flying swords, among which were 3 high gods. The other spectators who planned on ignoring Han Shuo and fled this dangerous area were terror-stricken. No one dared move a muscle after seeing a dozen something experts liquefied in an instant. Han Shuo's eyes glistened with chilling lights as he hovered loftily above the pandemonium. He expanded his consciousness, looked all around, and carefully surveyed the environment. He inwardly heaved a sigh of relief after discovering that the pandemonium was mostly intact and that the Pandemonians were safely hiding deep underground. "Log, Wasir, you have promised to help me kill this outsider," shrieked Salas. Log and Wasir wore astonished expressions while staring and sensing the wild, sinister energy on the young, handsome expert who had been in the limelight. The two sovereigns seemed hesitant. Chapter 871, A Demonstration of Might GDK 871. A demonstration of might. Han Shuo had slaughtered a bunch of experts as soon as he showed up. Those he killed were not Sala's followers, but innocent bystanders who wanted to leave the dangerous area. The 17 flying swords whistled and took a dozen or more lives just like that. Before the crowd could react, those innocent bystanders were turned into bloody liquid. Nothing of them was left. This was the first time that Log and Wasir had met Han Shuo. When they discovered that Han Shuo's strength was unfathomably great, they grew hesitant. Instead of immediately joining hands with Salas to attack Han Shuo, they merely stood there and gaped. "Hi, Brian, long time no see. I have been tirelessly fighting Salas to keep your pandemonium safe," said Asura with a faint smile. Han Shuo, who had been wearing a chilling face since his appearance, finally determined that the pandemonium had suffered only minimal damage, and his consciousness sensed the life aura of the 5 elite zombies. Han Shuo curled the corners of his lips and said to Asura, "Thank you, I will remember this favor in my heart." "You are welcome, it's no big deal," replied Asura courteously. In his mind, however, Asura could not be happier. He thought that he had made Han Shuo's presence in the fringe beneficial to him. After Han Shuo killed over a dozen of the spectators as a warning, not a single person dared move an inch. They gazed at Han Shuo's majestic figure nervously. Log and Wasir were unable to determine Han Shuo's true strength. They did not know if they should risk suffering injuries to assist Salas in fighting Han Shuo. "Oi, Log, Wasir, what is the meaning of this?" Salas cursed when he saw Log and Wasir not honoring their promises. "Where are your balls, you sons of bitches? Fine, you don't have to fight him. Just stop him from escaping while I kill him." Salas thought that with Log and Wasir blocking Han Shuo from escaping, he would be able to slaughter Han Shuo. With Han Shuo dead, Asura would have no reason to defend the pandemonium, and Salas could proceed with his demolition, saving what little was left of his reputation. Then, if given some time to recover his strength, he could rebuild his sovereignty and eventually return it to its former glory. Han Shuo suddenly burst out laughing and said, "Cut the nonsense, Salas. I won't try to leave today. Hee, but I wonder if you could do the same." Upon finishing those words, Han Shuo seemed to have transformed into a demon from hell in an instant. A terrifying, sinister energy widely erupted from him. It was filled with ruthlessness, savagery, and the desire to end all of existence. The faces of Log, Wasir, and Asura simultaneously transformed. They stared at Han Shuo with great astonishment, as though they couldn't believe that this was the Brian they heard of. All the gods in the vicinity were affected by the burst of sinister energy, especially those with just mid-god strengths. Their minds were overwhelmed by fear, and they trembled. They were so frightened that they almost subconsciously kowtowed at Han Shuo. Han Shuo at this moment seemed completely unstoppable, as though he was the master of the universe who could vaporize any being that displeased him with a snap of his fingers. All those fringe dwellers who came to watch suddenly had a strange suspicion that Salas might lose to this outsider. Log and Wasir, after snapping out from their daze, turned to stare at Salas puzzlingly. They couldn't understand how Salas managed to force Han Shuo to flee from the Empyrean Peak. Based on the terrifying demeanor displayed by Han Shuo right now, they reckoned that Salas would unlikely win in an all-out fight against Han Shuo. What in the world is going on? I shouted Log and Wasir in their minds, but they couldn't get any answer. Of all the sovereigns, Asura was perhaps the happiest at the moment, for he realized that he had made the right bet. Although he did not know how Han Shuo could become such a terror all of a sudden, he knew that he had established himself as Han Shuo's friend. As long as he could remain united with Han Shuo, he would have no fear even if pitted against Tyre, the strongest sovereign. And of the four, Salas had the most difficult time accepting the new situation. He sensed the terrifying sister energy emanating from Han Shuo, and determined that this was no longer the same Han Shuo that he last met on the Empyrean Peak. Back then on the Empyrean Peak, Salas sensed a power on Han Shuo that could threaten him. This time, however, Salas sensed a power that could kill him. "Tell me, Salas, who is going to die here?" Han Shuo raised his head to the sky and laughed in a mad, savage voice. He sensed that his body was filled with an energy that could seemingly annihilate all. Having this unstoppable power coursing through his veins felt awesome. As Han Shuo had only recently entered the Skybreak realm, he had yet to comprehend most of the new techniques and profound ideas. And yet, the aura Han Shuo emanated was so catastrophic that all those around him were terrified. Sala's gloomy face seemed rather hesitant after hearing Han Shuo's provocation. Instead of rushing to attack like he usually would, he was acting much more cautiously. He's bluffing, he must be bluffing. If he is as strong as he appears now, he wouldn't have escaped from the Empyrean Peak. This is not real. Salas repeated to himself in his mind, trying to make up for his lack of confidence. He glared at Han Shuo hatefully, but did not attack. "Hee, Salas, are you feeling afraid?" mocked Han Shuo with a nasty grin before he said, "It's all right. If you are too afraid to make the first move, I'll help you." Upon finishing those words, the 17 flying swords, carrying immense killing intent, spiraled towards Salas. The 17 swords transformed into 17 beams of lights as they flew before miraculously fusing together. The 17 energies were concentrated into one. Han Shuo had deployed the deicide slash, the second form of Avicii god-slaying sword formation, with ease. An immense radiance carrying unstoppable power had locked onto Salas. Every defensive boundary which he formed in haste had been vanquished. His lightning energy was easily scattered by that radiance. Salas could sense that his soul had been firmly locked on, that he could not hide from the great pillar of light no matter where he ran. And the further he retreated, the further the radiance would grow in power. He would eventually be struck. There were still several material planes filled with mortals that worshipped Salas. And at this moment, every last one of Salas' worshippers bled from every orifice as the power of faith was juiced out from their souls. All sentient life forms on those material planes went extinct in just moments. The power of faith that Salas had juiced out from the billions of souls instantly traversed across light years and converged on him. Salas used the energy to gather the element of lightning and formed a lightning shield above his head, intercepting that radiance in the last possible moment. An explosion of never-before-seen magnitude erupted. The earth cracked, and 2 hills were instantly flattened. There was a burst of blinding light followed by an incomparably loud boom. It was as though the apocalypse had arrived. Other than Log, Wasir, and Asura, who possessed over-god strengths, none of the spectators could see what happened. The blinding light and deafening rumble had caused everyone to temporarily lose both sight and hearing. They could only sense their surroundings through their souls. A long while later, the light finally diminished and the dust settled. Salas was heavily panting as he glared at the indifferent-demeanored Han Shuo. He said, "This will be all for today, but I'm not going to let you off. If I had not just fought Asura, you would be dead already." Then, before Han Shuo could say a word, Salas turned into a lightning bolt and darted. He vanished in an instant, leaving his followers around the pandemonium. However, Han Shuo continued to stand his ground, for he knew just how difficult it was to pursue an over-god expert fleeing with all his strength. Moreover, Rose, the 5 elite zombies, and others happened to emerge from underground at this time. With Sovereign Log and Wasir present, Han Shuo had to stay to ensure the safety of the pandemonium and his people. After coming to their senses, the spectators still couldn't understand what happened during that immense burst of light. However, they saw Salas hastily leaving the area. There was only one conclusion they arrived at: Salas was afraid of Han Shuo. Log suddenly forced an awkward smile and said to Han Shuo, I'm just going where the crowds are. I have no intention of making enemies." Upon finishing those words, without waiting for a reply, he too hurried out of the pandemonium. Wasir did not say a word. He nodded at Han Shuo and left after Log. They vanished in the blink of an eye. "You may all leave now. I don't like having unfamiliar faces around my valley," said Han Shuo as he gestured at the spectators, indicating for them to leave without delay. Can we go as well?" asked one of Sala's followers. They were still spooked. "Leave. I don't think that you will have a future under Salas." A sovereign who would abandon his followers and leave them to fend for themselves is not worthy of followers. Just leave, I have no grudges with you, said Han Shuo magnanimously. Han Shuo spared their lives simply because they were more useful alive than dead. After all, who could spread the story about his magnificence better than the survivors themselves? All those followers of Sala's bowed and thanked Han Shuo gratefully before they hastily left the pandemonium. On a bald mountain, a good distance from the pandemonium, stood a person. He said to himself, "Interesting, interesting. The fringe has been peaceful for too long. It's about time to get chaotic." Upon finishing those words, he vanished in a burst of destruction energy. Chapter 872, Repairing the Pandemonium, GDK 872. Repairing the pandemonium, those fringe dwellers gathered around the pandemonium vanished in just moments. They had witnessed the battle between Salas and Asura and saw Han Shuo drive Salas away using his sinister energy. Soon, except for Asura and Han Shuo, there weren't any other beings in the pandemonium. Han Shuo smiled and again thanked Asura. "I really appreciate your assistance. Without your help, the pandemonium wouldn't have survived until now." "Haha, you're welcome. We are friends and friends should help each other," shrugged Asura courteously. Back in the Omphalos, when Asura first met Han Shuo, although Asura had been polite, he was nowhere near as friendly as he was now. The fringe was a place where the strong were honored. The last time that they met, Asura did not consider Han Shuo as his equal, and therefore, unavoidably, his arrogance as a mighty sovereign would appear directly or indirectly when interacting with Han Shuo. But this time, Asura did not show even the slightest pride when speaking to Han Shuo. By chasing Salas away, Han Shuo had demonstrated that he possessed the strength to challenge any of the sovereigns. Therefore, Asura started treating Han Shuo as an equal. "In any case, I owe you one," insisted Han Shuo before suddenly turning his eyes to the center of the pandemonium and flying over. Simultaneously, the cauldron of myriad demon, in the form of grayish smoke, flew out from Han Shuo's body and towards the monolith at the center of the valley. Tens of thousands of wisps of thin gray smoke emerged from the monolith and flew into the cauldron that was suspended in the air. They were the divine souls of Sala's followers. After they lost their lives to the powerful demonic formations in the pandemonium, they were sucked into the monolith and temporarily stored there so that the cauldron spirit could collect it later. Asura instantly sensed the circulation of those bizarre energies. He stared at the hovering cauldron in astonishment while secretly guessing the miraculous uses and energy of the strange-looking divine weapon. In Asura's eyes, every bit about Han Shuo was filled with mystery. Even now, Asura still couldn't figure out what the energy was that Han Shuo cultivated. He was also very curious to know how Han Shuo had the ability to force Salas to flee in disarray. Asura wished to unravel the secrets of the unfathomable Han Shuo. As the strands of soul energy flowed into the cauldron, Han Shuo appeared calm and chatted with Asura. "So, after today, do you think that Salas can still stand tall in the fringe like before?" Asura stared blankly for a moment before he softly chuckled and replied, "Unless Salas can somehow prove that he can defeat both of us, his reputation in the fringe will take yet another nosedive. And most importantly, he fled from the battlefield all by himself, leaving his followers behind. I believe most people will think twice before enlisting themselves to serve a sovereign like him." Han Shuo laughed out loud. He seemed to be in a savory mood as he said, "It ain't gonna be easy for Salas to recover. I'm starting to doubt if he'll even come back for me." Han Shuo knew that he could defeat Salas even at his full strength. Salas likely also knew this. Therefore, Han Shuo doubted if Salas would be so reckless as to dig his own grave. Salas will have trouble maintaining his grasp on the fringe. "Brian, the Omphalos has always been under the joint management of us 5 sovereigns. If Salas were to fall, would you be interested in filling the void?" asked the beaming Asura. Thanks to the unique partnership between the 5 sovereigns, the Omphalos had remained a very unique place in the chaotic fringe. As the trading hub of the fringe, almost every business and transaction was taxed, earning their managers a hefty revenue. It was clear from those words of Asura's that he wanted Han Shuo to overthrow Sala's position and take his share of the Omphalos. Of course, Han Shuo would never let such a great treasure slip through his hands. He put on a mischievous smile and said, "I'll be visiting the Omphalos soon. I wonder if anyone will try to charge me an entrance fee. Very well, I shall take my leave, said Asura. He was going to handle things related to Salas. All right. Thanks a lot, Asura. I will remember your favor, assured Hanshu smilingly, and he watched Asura leave. Then, after Asura's figure vanished, Hanshu put on a scheming smile and mumbled to himself, Asura, Asura, how considerate of you. Several minutes after Asura left, the 5 elite zombies, Rose, Ramen, and Zavik emerged from the Pandemonium's underground palace. They were glad and relieved to find that the Pandemonium had suffered only minimal damages. Father, you are finally back, exclaimed Han Jin excitedly. Where is Salas? Father, where did he go? Asked Han Huo immediately after he came out of the underground palace. He scuttled. I believe that even after he recovers fully, he will think twice before trying to attack us again. Han Shu put on an unruffled smile and said to the party, From today onwards, you will be afraid of no one in the fringe. Even without Han Shu's explanation, the 5 elite zombies, Rose, and the others could sense that something was different about Han Shu, although they couldn't name it specifically. The new Han Shu seemed as intimidating as a great mountain and as enigmatic as the sea. Although they could not point out exactly what had happened to Han Shuo, they knew that Han Shuo must have made yet another breakthrough in his cultivation, and his strength must have taken yet another giant leap. Han Shuo wasn't one to give empty words or exaggerate. When he said that they had nobody in the fringe to be afraid of, it meant that he was no longer afraid of the 5 sovereigns. Father, you mean you now have enough power to fight the sovereigns? Asked Han Mu excitedly. Han Shu smiled and replied, That's right. Wonderful. Han Huo burst into a wild laughter and said, Then soon, we can stay in the Omphalos for as long as we want. No one is going to collect fees from us. All right, let's not talk about that now. Where are Goron and the others? Don't worry, Father, they are just fine, hiding in the evacuation tunnel I made. I think they will soon realize the situation here and come back, explained Han Tu. Excellent. Han Shuo looked around before he said, The Pandemonium is not destroyed, but still, it is damaged to some extent. All right, let the 6 of us work together and repair our lair. Han Shuo took a short pause before he grinned and said, I suppose I should further enhance the Pandemonium's power. Then, if there comes another day that Salas or another sovereign comes to destroy the Pandemonium, he must first peel his skin off. When Han Shuo built the Pandemonium's demonic formations, he was still in the Omen realm. And now that Han Shuo had entered the Skybreak realm, he possessed greater power and a more profound understanding of demonic formations. This meant that the Pandemonium would become even deadlier than it was now. Wonderful, cheered the 5 elite zombies in one voice. They were in high spirits. The father and sons then spent another period repairing and revamping the Pandemonium. They worked together tirelessly to make the Pandemonium more and more terrifying. Say what? Asked Han Hao as he stared at a stringer beside a lake. Salas was defeated. That outsider called Brian defeated Salas. They all left the Pandemonium, replied the unlucky stringer in a terrified voice. He was shivering as he was surrounded by a large group of ferocious god hunters. After sensing the disturbance over at the Pandemonium, Han Hao dropped all his tasks and started rushing to the valley. And when he was a third of the way into his journey, he came across this stringer who was selling the latest news about the Pandemonium. Han Hao's subordinates easily captured the stringer and brought him back to Han Hao. Tell me everything in detail, and I will not kill you. Han Hao was pleasantly surprised by the news. Hearing that Han Shuo had defeated Salas, Han Hao knew that his father had made a monumental breakthrough. He was more excited than anyone. Salas tried to invade the Pandemonium, and his forces suffered heavy casualties before they could capture it. They found no one inside The shaking stringer knew that this was his last hope for survival. He tried to calm himself down and explained everything he knew to Han Hao. Han Hao patiently listened until the stringer was finished talking. He nodded and instructed his subordinates, Let him go. Chief, this guy cultivates the energy of darkness. May I? One of the god hunters asked Han Hao while staring at the stringer, drooling. Spare me, sir. I've told you everything I know, please. The frightened stringer wailed tearfully as he knelt before Han Hao. Han Hao gestured at the stringer and said, You may leave. Before glaring at the darkness energy subordinate and reprimanding, one must do as one says. Understood, Chief. replied the god hunter as he lowered his head. Turn around. We will be visiting Sala's warehouses, commanded Han Hao. He was no longer heading for the pandemonium. He set his eyes on wiping out the remainder of Sala's forces and plundering the wealth Sala's accumulated through his countless years of reign over the fringe. Chapter 873, Not Qualified GDK 873. Not qualified Han Xiuo stayed in the pandemonium for a whole straight year, which passed in the blink of an eye. Besides repairing and revamping the demonic formations with the 5 elite zombies, Han Xiuo had also been meditating and exploring his newfound powers. Han Xiuo noticed that after entering the Skybreak realm, every strand of demonic yuan in his body had grown much stronger than before. Han Xiuo found that having seemingly unstoppable power coursing through his veins felt very pleasurable and awesome. Han Xiuo had learned the basics of Omen Invincible Body. When Han Xiuo's body was attacked, the demonic technique would automatically activate and defend his body from harm even if he was unconscious. And when there was no danger, it would deactivate and not drain Han Xiuo's demonic yuan. After ascending to the new demonic realm, Han Xiuo had finally mastered the Omen Invincible Body. Han Xiuo was very glad to know that the Omen Invincible Body could not only automatically defend him, but also automatically make a counterattack. Reminded Hedonist the translator. Curious of the power of this demonic technique he had just mastered, Han Xiuo decided to conduct an experiment using Ramen, who had a relatively resilient body. He sat cross-legged, set his consciousness still, and entered a deep meditation. Following the instructions of his master, Ramen suddenly charged at Han Xiuo and threw a punch at him. When his fist of tremendous power made contact with Han Xiuo, who was completely unaware of his surroundings, a great force abruptly blasted from Han Xiuo's body. Ramen was flung backward. He saw stars and heard ringing for a long while. As Han Xiuo wasn't sure just how powerful the automatic counterattack would be, he did not let Ramen assault him with all his might. From the fact that Ramen had become too terrified to help Han Xiuo conduct another experiment, Han Xiuo reckoned that the counterattack was quite formidable. After having broken through the Omen realm and reaching the Skybreak realm, both his realm's state and strength had substantially increased. He had even mastered the Omen Invincible Body. With that, even if Han Xiuo wasn't constantly alert, he would still have no fear of sneak attacks. Those who tried to harm him would be hoisting their own petard. During that 1 year, Han Xiuo and the 5 elite zombies had devoted their time to revamping the pandemonium, adding many more deadly demonic formations. Perhaps due to Han Xiuo's influence, or his newfound realizations while deploying the demonic formations, the 5 elite zombies made breakthroughs and were now just 1 leap away from the realm of High God. The 5 elite zombies could fuse their energies and form powerful attacks through the penta-elemental undead formation. The power of the penta-elemental undead formation increased exponentially relative to the strength of the 5 elite zombies. A cultivation breakthrough made by one of the 5 elite zombies could mean a multiple-fold increase in the formation's power. After that year, the 5 elite zombies stayed in the pandemonium and focused on stabilizing their realm state. They had recently reached late-stage midgodhood and were excited to further advance in power and to gain even greater strength. The concentration of elemental energies in the pandemonium was greater than anywhere else on Elysium, which had greatly benefited Rose and the others. These gods who cultivated in the pandemonium gained an even more profound understanding of the energy they cultivated and had made cultivation breakthroughs. The higher concentration of elemental energies not only allowed them to gather elemental energy faster, but it also inspired them with new insights into those energies. The experts could sense the great benefits after staying there for a short while. Even Rose was now on the brink of another breakthrough. She had been staying in the gymnasium for months. Apart from the 5 elite zombies, Rose had been serving Han Xiuo the longest and had experienced countless large and small battles. With each time that she stared death in the face, she would gain a better understanding of herself. After ages, Rose had finally heard the beckoning of the next realm, and she was now preparing herself to step into late-stage high godhood. Hearsay about Han Xiuo had been circulating the fringe like wildfire. Any fringe dweller who spoke of Han Xiuo would do so in a revering tone. They had considered Han Shuo as an existence of the same class as the five sovereigns. People started to worship Han Shuo, and experts of decent strengths had come forward to the pandemonium, throwing themselves to servitude under Han Shuo. Han Shuo delegated matters of this aspect to Zavik and Goron. Those experts born with extraordinary talents and who passed a background check were allowed to join. After all, it was part of Han Shuo's grand scheme to rule the fringe. Having sufficient manpower was a necessary component in executing the grand scheme. Other than Han Shuo, there was another expert whose reputation had been soaring in the fringe. He was none other than Han Hao. Ever since Salas fled from the pandemonium, there had been no news about him, as though he had suddenly gone missing. Not a single person in the fringe had seen him during the year. Even his most loyal followers knew nothing of his whereabouts or his current conditions. There had been many rumors about Sala's disappearance. Some said that he was hiding in an unknown region to quietly recover. Others claimed that he was afraid of Han Shuo and had left the fringe for good. However, not one of the rumors was verifiable. After Salas went missing, his followers could no longer ride roughshod over others. Without the threat of Sala's retaliation, their enemies no longer held back, launching a campaign to massacre Sala's followers, forcing them to go into hiding. And Han Hao was one of the predators they feared most. But Han Hao did not hunt them out of spite. He was merely trying to take the enormous wealth that Salas could not carry with him when he ran. With the group of god hunters he led, Han Hao wreaked havoc all over the fringe. Many of Sala's followers were killed, and most of his riches fell into Han Hao's hands. The remaining four sovereigns, naturally, were likewise very interested in taking over Sala's treasures, and had specifically commanded their troops to do so. However, the followers of the four sovereigns somehow seemed to be far less capable than Han Shuo. Their combined harvests were less than those obtained by Han Hao. Although those followers of the four sovereigns were all vicious, ruthless in character, none of them picked a fight with Han Hao as if they had been specifically instructed so. Instead of eliminating their competition, they allowed Han Hao to compete with them for Sala's riches and even avoided conflicts with him. The four sovereigns were no fools. Though they did not know the true relationship between Han Shuo and Han Hao, after conducting some investigations, they understood that the two had to be closely related as the energy they cultivated was rather similar. Therefore, all four of the sovereigns gave the same instruction to their followers, that they must not create any friction with Han Hao when dealing with Sala's matter. The four weren't worried about offending Han Hao, they were worried about offending Han Shuo, who had forced Salas into hiding. Han Hao seemed to know what the four sovereigns were doing, and he too avoided conflict with their followers. And if he ran into Asura's men, he would be extremely friendly, and sometimes he would even share a portion of his loots. Although Han Hao had never been to the pandemonium, he had considered the pandemonium as his home. As Asura had assisted in keeping the pandemonium safe, Han Hao considered Asura as having done him a favor. That was why he was so generous in sharing with Asura's followers. 1 year after Salas went missing, Han Shuo returned to the Omphalos. He approached one of the entry checkpoints with a carefree smile. The checkpoint was manned by Log's followers. When it was Han Shuo's turn to enter, they coldly demanded 100 black crystal coins. It was obvious that they did not know Han Shuo. Han Shuo glanced at the Omphalos guard, who demanded crystal coins from him with a funny look. Without changing the cordial smile on his face, Han Shuo said arrogantly, "My apologies, but from now on, I'm not going to pay a single crystal coin." The Omphalos guard, who possessed mid-stage, high-god strength in the energy of water, suddenly put on a dark face. With a beckoning of his hand, a group of Omphalos guards quickly surrounded Han Shuo. Entering the Omphalos without paying? Tired of living, are you? The bunch of you don't have the qualifications to demand crystal coins from me, though Log would. I tell you what, if Log is here to collect the entrance fee from me, I will pay up, replied Han Shuo smilingly. Heresy, how dare you address his lordship so disrespectfully? The Omphalos guard frowned and shouted to his comrades, I don't care who he is, I want him dead. He hasn't entered the Omphalos. Killing him here won't violate any rules. These followers of Log obviously did not have the slightest idea who Han Shuo was, not treating him like the significant character he was. To them, any being who entered the Omphalos was to pay the entrance fee, except for the 5 sovereigns. Everyone was quite familiar with the faces of the 5 sovereigns, but few knew of Han Shuo. I say it's you who are tired of living. The fringe today is no longer the same as it was. Other than the 5 sovereigns, haven't you forgotten that there is one more person that you must not offend? Haha, I believe that even if Sovereign Log was here, he would welcome Brian into the Omphalos. It was at this moment that a gentle peal of laughter suddenly sounded from the Omphalos. Harulai slowly walked into appearance. Although these followers of Log did not recognize Han Shuo, they knew Harulai, who had established himself in the fringe long ago. The Omphalos guard stared blankly for a moment before a sudden recollection. He froze and began to stare at Han Shuo with some respect. With uncertainty in his voice, he asked, "Are you Mr. Brian?" Han Shuo smiled and replied, "So, now that you know who I am, do you still want crystal coins from me?" "No," replied the Omphalos guard with a frightened face. He hastily explained, "Our sovereign has instructed us that we are to allow Mr. Brian to do as he wishes." Han Shuo chuckled. He nodded and replied, "Very well then." Upon finishing those words, Han Shuo walked into the Omphalos unruffled without giving those people another look. Those followers of Log immediately stepped aside and showed Han Shuo the way in. They were very respectful in their gestures. Chapter 874, Celestial Pearl in the Omphalos GDK 874. Celestial Pearl in the Omphalos, had it been someone else who refused to pay the entrance fees, those followers of Logs would have killed the person mercilessly. But when they learned that the man they surrounded was Han Shuo, they made a full 180 on their stance, immediately lowering their bearings and respectfully allowing entry to Han Shuo. A force so powerful as to defeat Salas was not one to reckon with. Even if their master, Sovereign Log, was there, he would have allowed Han Shuo into the Omphalos rather than making an enemy of him for a mere 100 black crystal coins. Han Shuo obviously had long known that might makes right in the fringe. He wasn't worried that those Omphalos guards might do something behind his back, so he walked into the Omphalos like no one was watching. Harulai immediately followed behind Han Shuo. He seemed indecisive, as though he had something to say but did not know how to begin. While Harulai's followers looked at Han Shuo with reverence, they were also watching Harulai, hoping that their chief would lead them to a brighter future. "Hurry and say it, you fool. You have missed the opportunity once. Don't miss it again now." Harulai's followers were hastening their chief with meaningful glances. Harulai seemed to find it a difficult thing to do. But after hesitating for a long time, he finally garnered enough courage to make a voice. Excuse me, me's Mr. Brian." Han Shuo stopped and turned to Harulai with a brow raised. "Can I help you?" he asked with a smirk. 1 year ago you asked me if I was willing to serve you. Do you still remember that?" asked Harulai awkwardly, shifting his glances to and fro. He seemed a little nervous or embarrassed. Han Shuo put on a stunned expression as though he had no idea what Harulai was talking about. "Really, did I?" "Yes, you did, sir. Over at Liulong's checkpoint, and right after you killed Buzz and Bertha." "Do you remember?" said Harulai. He felt as though he had been doused in an ice bath. Given Han Shuo's unfaltering memory, it was impossible that he would forget something like that. Han Shuo had asked Harulai to serve him the first time he stepped into the Omphalos, but Harulai immediately declined and even ridiculed Han Shuo. Soon after that, outside the Omphalos entry point guarded by Liulong, the 5 elite zombies formed the penta-elemental undead formation and annihilated dozens of forces within minutes. Goron and a group of fringe dwellers betrayed Buzz and Bertha before being forced to submit themselves for servitude under Han Shuo. After the event, having demonstrated his immense power, Han Shuo yet again invited Harulai to serve him, but Harulai gave no formal answer, citing that he needed time to decide. And now, after the entire land of chaos came to know of Han Shuo's reign over Salas and the supreme strength that led him there, Harulai, who had willfully taken his sweet time to consider, finally came forward to accept the offer. "My apologies, I can't recall having made such an offer," replied Han Shuo before he continued walking. Given Han Shuo's position and reputation in the fringe then, tons of powerful experts were throwing themselves at Han Shuo. He could do just fine with or without Harulai. Harulai looked dispirited as he watched Han Shuo leave. He knew that Han Shuo did not forget the offer he'd made just the year prior. It was also painfully clear to Haryulai that Han Shu no longer considered him a worthy associate, and that his coldness was a show of displeasure for the fact that Haryulai only accepted the offer after his meteoric rise in reputation. "Chief, what should we do now? Sai, we should have agreed back then. There are too many experts who want to serve him now. Given that our group isn't even the most powerful in the fringe, our odds of getting recruited is low." One of Haryulai's followers sighed remorsefully. "HMPH, what's so terrific about him?" Haryulai put on an angry face and barked. He merely managed to take advantage of Salas, who had exhausted too much divine energy fighting Asura. "With my position and reputation in the fringe, I can do just fine without him, as I always have." "If he's not so terrific, then were you pandering at his feet just now?" Those followers of Haryulai's scoffed as they secretly laughed at Haryulai's angry remark. It was clear to them now that Haryulai had zero foresight. Otherwise, Haryulai would have decisively accepted Han Shu's offer when he had the chance, and they would be more prosperous than they were at that moment. Not only could he not admit his shortcomings, but he even tried to downplay Han Shu's abilities. Haryulai's followers found his mindset laughable, but Han Shu didn't care about a forgettable character like Haryulai. He simply shrugged it off and went on with his business. "Excuse me, where are the sovereign shops under Sovereign Salas?" Han Shuo stopped a random stranger in the Omphalos and asked smilingly. "Salas. He, ever since he disappeared, the remaining 4 sovereigns have taken over his sovereign shops. Sovereign Tyre took 4, while the other 3 sovereigns took 2 each. You might not know this, but even Sala's right-hand men must now pay the fees to enter the Omphalos," snickered the random stranger. Han Shu stared blankly for a moment. He thought, damn, they do act fast, don't they? Han Shuo hesitated and weighed in his mind on whether he should seize those sovereign shops with brute force. But after seriously considering his options, Han Shuo decided not to do so, at least for now. Having recently stepped into the Skybreak realm, Han Shuo was confident that he could defeat any one of the sovereigns. However, if all the sovereigns joined hands against him, Han Shuo did not think that he could handle it for long. Most concerningly, Han Shuo had not met the strongest sovereign, Tyre, who was described as possessing unfathomable power if the legends were to be believed. Han Shuo thought that the risks outweighed the rewards. After spending some time pondering, Han Shuo decided to not be hasty and to take down the sovereigns one by one. Han Shuo then went to the sovereign shop that Asura ceded to him. Ever since Han Shuo took over the shop, he had set it up as yet another branch of the Celestial Pearl Pharmacy. Han Shuo had managed to move some pharmacists from his ethereal city branch to the Omphalos. They easily made more than enough medicines to fill the racks. But as Han Shuo had been busy with the pandemonium, he did not produce and sell his pelleted medicines in the Celestial Pearl branch. Therefore, the business wasn't doing that well. The Celestial Pearl was very popular in other cities because they sold the special, miraculous medicines that Han Shuo refined. But every medicine sold in this branch could be bought in other pharmacies. They were average and nothing exciting. It was only to be expected that those in the Omphalos weren't spending much there. Besides, there were all kinds of pharmacists and toxin makers all over the Omphalos. They were mad chemists and pharmacists from every corner of Elysium with the same but strange fascination towards producing toxic substances. These poison makers were extremely good at what they did. The medicines they refined were much more useful to the fringe dwellers than those common medicines sold by the Celestial Pearl. Though it was outlawed in the Divine Dominions, the use, production, and research of poisons were completely unrestricted in the fringe. Those common medicines sold by the Celestial Pearl were nothing compared to the medicines that could be found in the Omphalos. If not for the fact that the workers of a sovereign shop were exempted from paying the costly fees and taxes, the business might not have survived. The first thing Han Shuo noticed after his arrival at the sovereign shop was how massive it was. The shelves were filled with a dazzling lineup of medicines, but there were very few patrons. It was plain to see that the items sold here were not that interesting to the fringe dwellers. To maintain a strong footing in the fringe, one must have wealth, power, and reputation. It was necessary for Han Shuo to have all 3 of them. Han Shuo's arrival made the Celestial Pearl pharmacists extremely excited. They had heard about Han Shuo defeating Salas. They were very proud that their boss was such a mighty existence. Han Shuo did not talk much with the pharmacists. Soon after his arrival, he went to the medicinal material storehouse, collected the rare materials he needed, notified the pharmacists, and closed himself in a secluded gymnasium. All kinds of medicinal materials and herbs were thrown into the 9 tessellation cauldron. Strands of demonic yuan then started circulating along the channels on the surface as blazes gently licked the cauldron. Soon, the sweet fragrance of the medicines started emanating. Han Shuo vested his full attention on producing pelleted medicines. Using his demonic yuan energy, he broke down the medicinal ingredients before reforming the energies contained within. Suddenly, he realized that not only had his strength and realm state improved, but his efficiency at producing medicines had also improved. The pelleted medicines that Han Shuo previously needed 1 or 2 months to produce now took him just a few days. Furthermore, the quality of the medicines had not reduced, but were in fact even more potent than before. Additionally, when Han Shuo stopped worrying about everyday matters and focused on producing medicines, his demonic yuan could circulate very smoothly and slowly increase. Han Shuo realized that if he could clear his mind and cultivate, the growth of his demonic yuan would be quite a bit faster than usual. 10 days later, Han Shuo successfully produced more than 2,000 pelleted medicines. They were as round, as smooth, and as lustrous as pearls. The heavy fragrance they emanated would cause anyone to salivate. "Master, there is a large group of people lining outside. They notice the fragrance and they want to buy your medicines. Also, many fringe pharmacists have gathered outside to watch," a pharmacist hastily reported as soon as Han Shuo emerged from the gymnasium. "Just in time," said Han Shuo with a big smile. Chapter 875, Making a Move GDK 875. Making a move after reaching the Skybreak realm in his cultivation of demonic arts, Han Shuo could not only refine medicines faster, but the medicines had become even more potent than before. Many of the gods nearby noticed the salivating fragrance emanating from the Celestial Pearl Pharmacy. After making some inquiries, they learned that it was Han Shuo who had been refining medicines. These fringe dwellers had learned from those living in the divine dominions about the miraculousness of Han Shuo's medicines. Once they found out that it was Han Shuo who was making the medicines, they swarmed to the Celestial Pearl like bees, lining up to buy Han Shuo's medicines. In the fringe, there were all kinds of sinister pharmacists who delved into wicked research. Nearly all the drugs they produced were for harming others. There were no medicines for improving one's cultivation speed. Based on the information the fringe dwellers obtained, they knew that the medicines Han Shuo produced were incredibly useful for improving oneself in various aspects. This was very different from the kind of medicines abundantly found in the Omphalos. Some could increase the body's healing speed, some could stabilize the mind when one was cultivating, increasing one's cultivation speed. To many, this was the type of medicine that they needed most. Therefore, when the fringe dwellers heard that Han Shuo was producing medicine in the Celestial Pearl, they immediately rushed to the pharmacy from every region. They brought large amounts of black crystal coins with them, with the intention of purchasing as many of Han Shuo's medicines as possible. Although those gathered in the Celestial Pearl were ferocious and savage gods from all over the fringe, they were well-mannered and even voluntarily formed a tidy queue. No one of them dared make a scene. This was because they knew that Han Shuo wasn't just a talented pharmacist, but also one of the most formidable experts in the fringe. Inside the territory of such a mighty being, they tried to behave themselves as best as possible, lest they displease Han Shuo. Han Shuo looked around and saw the large crowd gathered inside his Celestial Pearl. As soon as they saw Han Shuo, they went to him respectfully and politely greeted him, telling him their obvious intention. Han Shuo did not expect that a crowd would gather here just because of the scent, but he did not mind it as it was a good thing for him. Han Shuo announced to the crowd, "My medicines will be sold for a fixed price, but only a small portion will be sold each day. They will be sold on a first-come, first-served basis." Han Shuo had been running the Celestial Pearl for a long time and had learned some techniques on raising the pharmacy's reputation and profits from Phoebe and Emily. Given his current reputation, not one in the crowd dared object his decision. He gave his pharmacists the medicines he made, gave them some instructions, and retreated to a private lounge. Many of the toxin makers who were standing among the crowd were wearing strange expressions. It seemed as though they had something to say but couldn't speak. But after Han Xiu went out of sight, they grumbled in low voices, "What's so terrific about those medicines? I'll eat my hat if they are as miraculous as he claims." As will I. If he possesses the strength to defeat Salas, then it's impossible for him to have a high level of mastery in the field of drug making too. HMPH, if it isn't for him possessing tremendous strength, I would have challenged him to a duel in drug making already. As soon as Han Xiu started refining medicines, many of the fringe dwellers had rushed to the Celestial Pearl to wait. This had affected the sales of the toxin makers. It was only natural that they would be unhappy about it. However, they were too intimidated by Han Xiu's tremendous strength to voice their grudges in front of Han Xiu, nor did they have the courage to cause trouble at the Celestial Pearl. "We will buy some of his medicines to test if it's as wonderful as he claims. HMPH, if it turns out that he's making false claims, even though he's very powerful, we will speak the truth as it is," suggested one of the toxin makers. His colleagues agreed. These pharmacists who specialized in producing toxic substances were very queer and condescending in temperament. If it wasn't for their fear of Han Xiu's tremendous strength, they would have made a scene already. Although Han Xiu had gone out of sight, his senses covered the entire Celestial Pearl, and he clearly heard every word the toxin makers uttered. Wearing a big smile, he called for one of his shop workers and instructed, "If those toxin makers want to buy my medicines, let them skip the queue. Make sure that they get their hands on my medicines." "Sorry, my lord, but I don't understand. Those bastards are here to stir up trouble. My lord, you might not know this, but when your lordship is not in the Celestial Pearl, they often try to defame us and claim that our medicines are useless," replied the shop worker. He seemed very irritated by those poison makers. Before Han Xiu came to the Celestial Pearl, before he had defeated Salas, these poison makers were unafraid of Han Xiu and were secretly spreading slanders about the Celestial Pearl, adversely affecting the pharmacy's business. Although Han Xiu was previously unaware of this, he figured out the poison makers' intentions in no time. Han Xiu smiled but did not explain it to the worker. He instructed, "I understand, but just do as I say." Although they are queer in temperament, they are nonetheless very talented in their fields. I want to see if they can find faults in my medicines." After hearing Han Xiu's words, the shop worker dismissed himself puzzlingly and went on to carry out Han Xiu's orders. Han Xiu planned on making all those poison makers his pharmacists by hook or by crook. He was going to move the Celestial Pearl headquarters to Omphalos and dominate the pharmacy market of the fringe. His rivals would either get crushed or join him. "Hello, Mr. Bryan, it's been a while." A familiar voice sounded before Liulong stepped into the private lounge with a grin. Han Xiu had in fact been waiting for Liulong. He had sensed Liulong's presence after he was done refining medicine. Han Xiu knew that Liulong was very loyal to Asura, and he must have come to the Celestial Pearl to relay a message from Asura. "Oh, it's you. How can I help you, Liulong?" replied Han Xiu in a friendly manner. Liulong seemed rather surprised because he did not expect Han Xiu would still treat him in as friendly a manner as before. From Liulong's point of view, from the moment that Han Xiu defeated Salas, he had risen to being in existence at the same level as the 5 sovereigns. Liulong thought that Han Xiu would have handled himself differently before others and wouldn't treat him as politely as before. Therefore, Liulong was going to behave the same with Han Xiu as he often did to Asura. However, before he could do so, he was surprised to discover that Han Xiu did not care about and was still as friendly as before. He found this very peculiar. "I have come with a message from Lord Asura," replied Liulong smilingly in a very respectful tone. He continued, "Salas has gone missing, and the sovereign shops he possessed have been divided amongst the remaining sovereigns. As Mr. Bryan wasn't at the Omphalos at that time, you did not get any. However, Lord Asura believes that Mr. Bryan has the strength to control a piece of the Omphalos. His lordship has been in talks with the other sovereigns, asking them to relinquish the sovereign shops they took from Salas and let Mr. Bryan replace Sala's place in the Omphalos. However, it seemed as though it's not an easy task to accomplish. There hasn't been much progress so far. Han Shuo looked at Liulong smilingly, nodded, and said, Liulong, please thank Lord Asura for me. I really don't know how I could ever repay his lordship for doing so much to help me. Han Shuo had always felt that those sovereign shops that previously belonged to Salas were rightfully his. Mr. Brian, the most important message I need to pass you is that Lord Asura intends to relinquish the 2 sovereign shops he obtained to you. Lord Asura believes that in order for Mr. Brian to take Sala's place in the Omphalos, Mr. Brian should inherit those assets previously possessed by Salas, said Liulong smilingly. Han Shuo was astounded. He did not expect that Asura would be willing to surrender such great capitals just to improve their relationship. Han Shuo was elated and replied, That's wonderful. Please tell Lord Asura that I really appreciate it and thank you so much. What is this Asura after? Is he trying to use me as a tool? I thought Han Shuo secretly while wearing a grateful, cheery face. There is one more thing I'm instructed to inform Mr. Brian. There are hundreds upon thousands of shops in the Omphalos. If Mr. Brian wishes to have a share of the Omphalos, besides the consent of all the sovereigns, you will also need the approval of at least half of the shop owners. These are the 2 requirements that Mr. Brian must fulfill in order to be one of the owners of the Omphalos, said Liulong. Han Shuo nodded smilingly and replied, Thank you, now I know what I must do. I doubt that those shop owners would have any objection. It should be a done deal as long as I can persuade the other 3 sovereigns. As those shop owners in the Omphalos did not possess formidable power, it would be a wonder if they would resist Han Shuo, a most terrifying expert. But Han Shuo immediately knew that there had to be caveats. Perhaps the other 3 sovereigns might instruct the shop owners to oppose him. With that, the 3 sovereigns could avoid friction with Han Shuo for the moment while preventing Han Shuo from getting a piece of the Omphalos. Most of the shop owners lived inside the Omphalos. If Han Shuo were to kill any of the dissenting shop owners, the action would be tantamount to declaring war on the 4 sovereigns. With that, Tyre, Log, and Wasir would have an excuse to join forces and kill him. After thinking through all kinds of possibilities, Han Shuo had a rough idea of those sovereigns' intentions. He sneered in his mind and started thinking about his countermeasures. Chapter 876 Crisis at the House of Han, GDK 876. Crisis at the House of Han. While Han Shuo was achieving his great ambitions in the fringe, the House of Han ran into a major crisis in the City of Shadows. Ever since Han Shuo left the City of Shadows, the members of the House of Han had retreated to Fort Lasberg. They had been quietly expanding their influence and business in the fort, not meddling with any business related to the City of Shadows. Wallace, the city lord of the City of Shadows, had tacitly approved the members of the House of Han leaving the city center. He had not notified the House of Han to participate in all big and small affairs related to the city. He had excluded the House of Han from taking any part in running the city. As the fringe was just too far away from the City of Shadows, it was very difficult for news to reach the City of Shadows from the fringe. This was worsened by the unique migration pattern. The criminals and outlaws from all 12 dominions would usually head to the fringe out of desperation. They would bring the latest tidings from every corner of Elysium with them to the fringe. However, very few of those ferocious gods who had stepped into the fringe would ever get the chance to return to their respective dominions. This created a phenomenon where there were countless experts migrating into the fringe while few migrated out. Therefore, it was also slow for news in the fringe to make it to the rest of the Elysium. The most recent news about Han Shuo that Phoebe, Emily, and the others learned was he had left Ethereal City for the fringe. They had no idea what happened in the fringe or how he was doing. Even City Lord Wallace had no clue about how well Han Shuo was doing in the fringe. Han Shuo had ceased all contact and seemed to have disappeared forever. Nobody knew when or if he'd ever return to the City of Shadows. Having seen the countless miraculous deeds Han Shuo accomplished while he was in the city, for the future of the House of Saint in the City of Shadows, Wallace had started to quell the strength of the House of Han. But as Wallace knew that the House of Han was close friends with Andre, Carmelita, Ayabashi, Erebus, and others, he did not do anything too excessive. Wallace seemed to have tacitly approved of Han Shuo's decision to relocate all of the House of Han's manpower and resources to Fort Lasberg. He even showed absolutely no interest or reaction when the Divine Guards of the Fifth Corps left the city and moved to Fort Lasberg. Fort Lasberg was located at the border of the city's sphere of influence. From Wallace's point of view, the House of Han could not cause him trouble from that region. As long as the House of Han didn't expand their influence inside the city, Wallace would be happy and leave the family clan to themselves. However, back when Han Xiuo lived in the City of Shadows, he had offended just too many people. For instance, Hoffs of Hushville City, who was located uncomfortably close to Fort Lasberg. After a few years of extensive investigation, Hoffs learned the perpetrators who attacked Hushville City were Han Xiuo and Rose. And after further investigation, he found Wallace seemingly deliberately alienating the House of Han. Hoffs had been searching for Han Xiuo to take revenge, but after failing to do so, he turned his eyes to the House of Han at Fort Lasberg. Besides Hoffs, there was a second person eyeing Fort Lasberg vengefully. He came from the most powerful family clan in the Darkness Dominion, the House of Broadhurst. Not only had he lost a good number of his high gods to Han Xiuo, but his son was murdered before his arranged marriage with Donna. After many years of thorough investigation, Larrickson managed to determine that Han Xiuo was the person who had murdered his son. It was easy to see why he would want to kill Han Xiuo and every member of his family clan. The House of Broadhurst had control over the city of Gorging Clouds, the most powerful city in the Darkness Dominion. Larrickson posed a greater threat to Fort Lasberg than Hoffs. Larrickson and Hoffs had an identical objective, and they reached a pact soon after their first meeting. They intended to join forces and destroy Fort Lasberg's House of Han. The two were confident that they could wreck Fort Lasberg using the formidable experts at their behest. Inside Hushville City, Hoffs and Larrickson were having a conversation in the city lord's mansion. Hoffs and Larrickson had been scheming an assault on Fort Lasberg for a long time. The two were confident of flattening Fort Lasberg with the forces they commanded. But there was still one thing keeping them from taking vengeance. Lord Larrickson, I have no doubt that by working together, we would be successful in reaching our objective. My only concern is Wallace. When all is said and done, Fort Lasberg is a territory of the City of Shadows. If we are to invade the fort, Wallace might retaliate, and we could start a civil war. Fort Lasberg was a territory of the City of Shadows. Trespassing on the fort to attack the House of Han would be a provocation against the City of Shadows. This could potentially lead to a war between the cities of the Darkness Dominion. That was definitely not something that the Overgod of Darkness wished to see. Larrickson, whose mind was filled with a thirst for revenge, replied, "Don't worry about this. Wallace will not make an enemy of us for a small little House of Han. He will turn a blind eye to us sieging Fort Lasberg." Hoff seemed pleasantly surprised, and he exclaimed, "You mean to say Wallace has?" Larrickson nodded affirmatively and explained, "I have communicated with Wallace. He will pretend as though we caught him off guard. And after the event, the most he will do is publicly denounce us. He won't go to war against us for a small family clan. The House of Han is threatening the House of Saints' position in the City of Shadows. The way I see it, Wallace wouldn't be happier to see the House of Han destroyed." "Then there is nothing that I'm worried about," Hoffs exhaled before he put on an evil grin and said, "Let us begin our operation." "Yes. Assemble your troops. We will start marching towards Fort Lasberg soon. Those in the House of Han are incapable of putting up a fight against us. We will massacre every last one of the family clan," said Larrickson ferociously. "And I believe that after the House of Han is destroyed, Brian will rush back home no matter where he is. And when he returns, we will get rid of him." Hoffs laughed heartily. It took him years and a great deal of effort to quell the family clans in Hushville City in his sphere of influence. He could not be happier to think that he would soon get his revenge. Inside the Han residence in Fort Lasberg, the members of the House of Han had become aware of Hoffs and Larrickson's plan. During the past few years, the House of Han had stopped expanding in the City of Shadows. They had added not even one new Celestial Pearl branch in the city and had distanced themselves from matters related to the city. They had gone silent. However, secretly, the House of Han was growing. Although the House of Han had stopped expanding in the City of Shadows, they were working with many big family clans in the Death and Destruction Dominions, expanding the influence and business of Celestial Pearl to those dominions. With even greater revenue streams, the House of Han was able to recruit even more experts. Before Han Shuo departed from the City of Shadows, he had built layers upon layers of defensive formations, as well as the 8 Desolation and Torment formation in Fort Lasberg. The members of the House of Han had been training inside the formation, and their overall strength was starkly improving. The House of Han had built a decent information network in the dominions of death, darkness, and destruction. Using the network, they became aware of Larixen visiting Hoffs in Hushville City. From the unusual activities Larixen and Hoffs showed, the House of Han came to the conclusion that the two were going to attack Fort Lasberg. Although the House of Han had been rapidly strengthening, they were still no match against the forces commanded by Hoffs and Larixen. Hoffs was the city lord of Hushville City, while Larixen was the brother of the House of Broadhurst's patriarch. If the two of them joined forces to attack Fort Lasberg, the House of Han would inevitably be defeated. Phoebe, Emily, Mike, Strathome, Sanguis, Bollins, Gilbert, and all other core members of the House of Han gathered in the meeting room of the Han residence. They were discussing how to defend themselves against Hoffs and Larixen's invasion. We have received intel that Larixen, a late-stage high god himself, brought 3 high gods with him to Hushville City. Hoffs, the city lord of Hushville City, will surely bring a large number of his city's divine guards to the invasion. We are outnumbered and outgunned, briefed Emily worryingly to those in the meeting room. The party felt helpless against the 2 tremendous forces. It was impossible for the House of Han to resist the might of a city in just a few years. Unfortunately for us, Master is not with us, or else those 2 fellas would certainly regret ever having been born, remarked Gilbert. To him, Han Shuo had always been an invincible force. Although both Larixen and Hoffs were formidable in their own rights, they had suffered defeats to Han Shuo, and they obviously were no match for him. HMPH, if Master is in Fort Lasberg, I doubt that the 2 would even have the courage to attack us, remarked Sanguis coldly. He was angered, and his pupils immediately turned blood red as a visible mist of blood emanated from his body. From the aura he emanated, it was obvious that his strength had yet again soared during those few years. But Brian is not around, and we must rely on ourselves. Strathome bunched his brows tightly and said, "We must not leave fort, for we have defenses set up. We would be even more powerless against our enemies outside the fort." Strathome took a short pause and calmly continued, "Send a message to Erebus, Ayabashi, Carmelita, and Andre, and inform them of our situation. If they can get to Fort Lasberg in time, our chances could substantially increase." "All right, I'll get it done," said Phoebe before immediately dispatching messengers. Fort Lasberg was suddenly busy. Multiple shadows dashed out the fort as fast as they could for the survival of the House of Han. Chapter 877. Prepare for Battle GDK 877. Prepare for battle. A few days later, the core members of the House of Han reassembled in the same meeting room. They seemed even more stressed and gloomy than before. The messengers they sent had returned to the Han residence, but none of them came back with good tidings. Carmelita was in secluded cultivation and could not be reached. Andre had departed for Darkwater City 10 days before and had yet to return. Ayabashi and Erebus were executing a covert mission at a secret location. Nobody knew if they were still within the borders of the City of Shadows or not. None of the messengers even caught sight of the recipients. Andre, Carmelita, Ayabashi, and Erebus, the 4 experts closest to the House of Han, had gone unreachable as though they had planned it ahead of time. Phoebe and the others felt desperate and disappointed that the 4 would go missing when the House of Han needed their help. This cannot be a mere coincidence. It's impossible that all 4 of them are somehow out of reach just as Larixen entered Hushville City. Phoebe gnashed her teeth and angrily remarked, "They were very close with Brian when he was still in the City of Shadows. Especially Carmelita and Erebus, who wouldn't be living today if it wasn't for Brian. But it turns out they're all heartless scum who would turn a blind eye at us when we need their assistance the most. Perhaps it's not them." Strathome wore a dark face as he slowly said, "There is a person who can send all 4 of them away and prevent our messages from reaching them." "Wallace," exclaimed Mike. Strathome nodded and said, "He is the most powerful man in the city. He alone can send Ayabashi, Erebus, and Andre away from the city at the same time. Carmelita is his daughter. He can force her to go on a period of secluded cultivation. Yes, given their relationship with Brian, they would definitely come to our aid if they knew that we were in danger. Wallace must have architected this situation. He wouldn't kill us himself, he wouldn't sully his hands, but he would no doubt use Larrickson and Hoffs to do his dirty work, said Iremike angrily. Despicable. I cannot stand him any longer. Gilbert yelled out of anger. We should march into the city and kill that fucking Wallace. No, Stratham shook his head and said, even if we know that it's Wallace who has been pulling the strings, we must not lay a finger on him. We are already having trouble dealing with Larrickson and Hoffs. Now is not the time to make another powerful enemy. Then, what should we do? Gilbert sighed and asked in a dispirited manner. Let's just try to hang in here for as long as we can. I have contacted the family clans in the Death and Destruction Dominions. Wallace may want us dead, but our business partners sure don't. They are sending men to Fort Lasberg to help us evacuate. We just need to stay alive until they are here. Emily forced a smile and consoled the party. During the past few years, the Celestial Pearl had been cooperating with some family clans in the Death and Destruction Dominions, opening a large number of pharmacy branches in those dominions. Every party involved in the partnership made large amounts of crystal coins. It was important for those family clans that the House of Han stayed alive so that the crystal coins would keep rolling in. Therefore, immediately after those family clans received the messages from Emily about the House of Han's situation, they replied saying that they would dispatch men to the City of Shadows and help the House of Han escape, and even offered them refuge. This is great news, Stratham said. Then we should all get packed up. Wallace wants to kill us through the hands of our enemies. We cannot live in the City of Shadows any longer. Right, we should begin transferring a portion of our assets out the fort and begin the work necessary for our departure. Before our allies are here, we will stay in the fort and resist our enemies. But don't worry, our patriarch put a lot of thought and effort into the defenses of the fort. They cannot be easily defeated, said Bollins. Then let us get ready for a glorious battle, said Sanguise. Fort Lasberg became buzzing with construction and defense-related activities. Under the House of Han's management, every corner of Fort Lasberg was now covered with energy towers, cannon towers, deadly boundaries, and seals. The previously poor town was now an impressive fortress. Using the large amounts of black crystal coins the House of Han accumulated, the weak segments of the fort had been fortified with energy crystal-based boundaries and weapons. The 5th Corps Divine Guards, the strongest divine guards in the City of Shadows, were also equipped with the highest quality divine weapons there were, further increasing their deadliness. Sanguise and Bollins, the most elite troops in the 5th Corps, had been soaring in strength during the past few years. The troops and workers of the House of Han followed the orders they received and started working around the clock. Dazzling energy towers and cannons were moved and relocated. The energy crystal cannons were aimed outwards at the expansive field, silently waiting and ready to greet the enemies with warm hugs of destructive energy at any moment. In a dense jungle 1,000 miles from Fort Lasberg stood Ralph, the chief of the 2nd Corps. Gathered around him were the 2nd Corps Divine Guards. They were stone cold as they listened to Ralph's mission briefing. You should all know what we are here for. Though we won't initiate the attack, we need to take care of those who managed to escape. The House of Han has severely threatened the interests of the House of Saint. Ayabashi and Erebus have been brainwashed by Brian, and they will not get rid of the House of Han. We are the only people left who can do what's necessary. Ralph and his 2nd Corps Divine Guards were going to hide at a possible escape route to intercept and take down every member of the House of Han who escaped from Fort Lasberg after Larrickson and Hoffs invaded the fort. Ralph, who was wearing a chilling face, glanced at his equally ferocious Divine Guards before he continued. Although the House of Han may have seemed benign for the past few years, they have in fact been secretly working with family clans in the Death and Destruction Dominions and growing stronger and stronger. If we do not exterminate them now, we might be the ones who will be exterminated in the near future. Don't worry, my lord. The presence of the 5th Corps has threatened the position of our 2nd Corps. We will wipe the 5th Corps and the House of Han out of the City of Shadows, said one of the Divine Guards ruthlessly. He took a short pause and hesitated a bit before he continued. However, there is not a hint of that Brian guy's whereabouts. He is a formidable expert. If someday in the future he discovers what we will do, what will happen to us? Many of them were stunned at the mention of Brian's name. Although Han Shuo had been away from the City of Shadows for many years, the citizens and the divine guards had not forgotten his deeds and accomplishments. In their minds, Han Shuo was an expert second only to City Lord Wallace. Han Shuo would remain a threat to them for as long as he was alive. Ralph frowned slightly and he rebutted in a cold voice, "What is there to be afraid of? Our City Lord is the most powerful being in the City of Shadows. Even if Brian finds out what we will do soon, the City Lord will protect us. Don't worry, no matter what happens, the City Lord will be shielding us." Although these divine guards were still feeling somewhat nervous even after Ralph's reaffirmation, they did not voice their concerns any further. They knew Ralph's temper very well and were aware of the friction between him and Han Shuo. They dared not question Ralph's words. From the opposite of Ralph's location, an army led by Larrickson and Hoffs was moving with stealth towards Fort Lasberg. Although the House of Hoffley had lost a great number of experts a few years ago, Hoffs remained a respected figure in Hushville City. There remained a good number of experts who would serve under him. After a few years of recruiting, the number of divine guards at his command was now much closer to the pre-incident level. Larrickson, who was flying at the front of the army, wore a dark, gloomy face. His mind was constantly filled with thoughts of revenge. It seemed as though the horrific scene of his son's dead body had been haunting and tormenting him every second of every day. Brian, House of Han, House of Lavers, Donna, I'm going to kill all of you. Thought Larrickson as he flew towards Fort Lasberg. When the news broke that Larrickson's son had been murdered, Donna immediately knew that it was Han Shuo who did it. Fearing that Larrickson might blame her, and thus her family clan upon finding out the truth, she went to her father and told him everything. Felder decisively commanded his family clan to escape from the city of Gorging Clouds, while Larrickson was madly hunting for the murderer. After discovering the truth, Larrickson activated his forces to locate and annihilate the House of Lavers. But as Felder was quick in escaping, Larrickson had failed to do so. The House of Lavers seemed to have vanished from the death, darkness, and destruction dominions. He couldn't locate the members of the Lavers family no matter where he looked. Larrickson deemed the House of Lavers, Donna, Han Shuo, and the House of Han responsible for his son's death and sought to destroy them. Having been unable to locate the House of Lavers and Han Shuo, he turned his crosshair to the House of Han in Fort Lasberg. Half a month later, a group of Avengers led by Larrickson and Hoffs arrived before Fort Lasberg. They wasted not a single word and started bombarding the fort as soon as they arrived. They planned on flattening Fort Lasberg using their overwhelming power. Chapter 878, Welcome to Fort Lasberg GDK 878. Welcome to Fort Lasberg. Larrickson and Hoffs assumed that in the House of Han, Han Shuo was the only powerful expert, while the remaining members were as harmless as kittens. With Han Shuo not in Fort Lasberg, they assumed that the fort would be as fragile as a dried leaf. Therefore, as soon as they were outside the fort, Hoffs commanded his divine guards to attack. The assaulting army they formed were made of the most elite divine guards in Hushville City and High Gods from the House of Broadhurst, while both the commanders, Larrickson and Hoffs, were late-stage High Gods. Against such a powerful army, not just the House of Han, but perhaps even the House of Kinson and House of Kisa, which had stood tall in the City of Shadows for countless years, wouldn't be able to survive. Outside Fort Lasberg, Larrickson and Hoffs wore gloomy faces and watched coldly as their troops transformed into streaks of shadows and charged at the fort recklessly as though nothing in the fort could harm them. They felt that the House of Han should be honored, that they would be present to watch them get exterminated. The two wouldn't go to the front lines of the battle unless there emerged an enemy of their class. The army ferociously charged at Fort Lasberg while making loud battle cries. The divine weapons in their hands emanated an astonishing amount of divine auras. They seemed as though they were certain of their victory. Then, suddenly, thunderclap-like rumbles sounded from Fort Lasberg. Shortly after, dazzling pillars made of light carrying astonishing powers shot out from the fort like arrows. The magnificent, pillar-shaped radiances had the same width as a human adult's waist. More than a dozen of those energetic beams shot out from the fort at once. Many of Hoff's divine guards from Hushville City were caught off guard and were struck. The energetic beams vaporized everything in its path and made large holes through the divine bodies of midgods. Many of the invaders were severely injured, if not instantly killed. Ever since taking over Fort Lasberg, the House of Han had invested tons of black crystal coins on the fort's defenses. The energy crystals from the numerous mining pits nearby were delivered to Fort Lasberg so that they can be used as batteries for the energy crystal cannons. The energy crystal cannons would deliver beams of extreme destructiveness. With enough energy crystals, a blast from the cannon could be as deadly as a high god's attack. The dozen-something energy crystal cannons were usually proudly displayed on the defensive wall around the fort to intimidate its enemies. But when Phoebe and the others learned that Hoffs and Larrickson were going to attack the fort, the energy crystal cannons were relocated and hidden in the energy towers so that they could give their enemies a big surprise. But their plan wouldn't have worked so well had Hoffs and Larrickson not been so arrogant to take the House of Han so lightly. Had they been just a little more cautious, the energy crystal cannons wouldn't have caused them such great casualties. The energy crystal cannons, powered by energy crystals in energy towers, shot out resplendent beams at the followers of Hoffs. In the blink of an eye, a dozen or more divine guards from Hushville City were struck by the energy crystal cannon. They instantly perished. Below the energy towers, the members of the House of Han were busily refilling the towers with fresh energy crystals. When the energy towers were refilled and energized, the energy crystal cannon began to glow. Its luminosity rapidly increased before a loud rumble was heard the moment it shot out towards the horizon as a blinding beam of light. "Welcome to Fort Lasberg, motherfuckers," shouted Gilbert as he unloaded energetic beams on Hoff's divine guards, shooting them down from the sky. "Watch out, get scattered," shouted Hoffs at the top of his lungs. He did not expect that the small little Fort Lasberg would possess such a large number of high-yield energy crystal cannons, along with the piles of energy crystals needed to power them. The energy crystal cannons were not just costly to acquire, but they were also extremely expensive to operate. Many considered firing such high-yield energy crystal cannons as burning money, for each blast would consume energy crystals worth tens of thousands of black crystal coins. Therefore, most of the family clans that possessed energy crystal cannons would only use it sparingly. Unfortunately for Hoffs and Larrickson, they did not know that the Celestial Pearl Pharmacy under the House of Han had countless branches in the death, destruction, and darkness dominions that generated them a magnanimous wealth of black crystal coins. The House of Han was filthy rich and could easily afford to consume that tremendous amount of energy crystals. Due to Hoff's underestimating and lack of scouting his enemy's strength, nearly 100 of the Hushville City divine guards had perished. Hoff's cries were submerged under the deafening rumbles of the energy crystal cannons. His divine guards continued charging at Fort Lasberg recklessly as the energy crystal cannons continued to greet them with hellfire, but they had gotten smarter. They flew in a more dispersed formation and made large distances from their comrades. With that, the energy crystal cannons were no longer as effective. Although they had been blasting the invaders as frequently as before, only 20-something additional experts were struck. The Hushville City divine guards, although under constant bombardment of energy crystal cannons, managed to reach Fort Lasberg. They flew over the defensive wall and started descending into the fort. The first divine guard who descended towards Fort Lasberg suddenly jolted and halted. He discovered that he had slammed into an invisible barrier, and he could not fly any closer into the fort. But when he tried to move away, the invisible barrier suddenly formed an intense binding energy and stopped him from leaving. He started spinning and rolling uncontrollably as he tried in vain to free himself from the barrier. Then, abruptly, an energy beam from an energy crystal cannon shot into the sky and scored a direct hit on the divine guard. Most of his body was instantly vaporized while the remaining bits splattered. Within the next few moments, another 15 of the invaders were annihilated in the same manner. They were all trapped on the invisible barrier powered by the energy towers all over Fort Lasberg before they were blasted from the sky by energy crystal cannons. As the energy crystal cannons and the barrier were powered by the same energy, the barrier didn't obstruct the destructive beams that came from the energy crystal cannons, nor would those beams affect the barrier. For this reason, it may have appeared to an outsider that Fort Lasberg was not protected by a barrier. Those Hushville City Divine Guards certainly thought so, which was why they had descended into the fort so confidently. The energy crystal cannons and the barrier were a match made in heaven. In another few moments, yet another dozen or so of the Divine Guards were vaporized as they tried to trespass upon Fort Lasberg. They died horrifically. "Damn it, retreat!" shouted Hoffs angrily. But that command of Hoffs was rather late. Most of those who charged at Fort Lasberg had been killed. The remaining Divine Guards could already tell that it was foolish to try to descend into the fort and dared not proceed recklessly. Before he had even breached Fort Lasberg, Hoffs had lost more than 150 Divine Guards. The forces under Hoffs' command had been greatly diminished during the Hushville City incident a few years ago. It was only recently that Hoffs had managed to keep the rivaling family clans in the City of Shadows in check. He started to worry if those family clans would resume with their scheme to overthrow him after learning that his troops had further diminished. City Lord, Fort Lasberg is protected by energy crystal cannons and an energy barrier at the same time. This is going to be troublesome. We have been too impulsive. It appears that the House of Han is indeed very rich. They are willing to burn their crystal coins to resist us. Hoff's chief of the First Corps Divine Guards reported to him, "Destroy the energy barrier. As soon as it is destroyed, we can breach the fort." Although Hoffs felt extremely angry, he had not lost his mind. He continued, "Once we breach the fort, they won't stand a chance against our overwhelming forces. Everyone, attack the energy barrier. It seems that the House of Han is very wealthy. We have struck gold." Larrickson commanded his experts with a sinister smile. Larrickson brought the most elite experts from his house of Broadhurst. These experts did not participate in the first assault on Fort Lasberg. Although Hoffs had lost more than 100 Divine Guards, Larrickson's experts did not even suffer a scratch. As Hoffs yelled all sorts of profanities, Larrickson remained unruffled, fantasizing about the piles of black crystal coins in the Han residence. Hoff's eyes suddenly lit up when he heard those words. He gazed at Fort Lasberg lustfully and remarked, "That's right. If the House of Han has such a great stockpile of energy crystals, then the wealth they have stored in their mansion must be very substantial as well. If I can take that wealth, it would somewhat compensate for the losses I have suffered." Larrickson took a glance at Hoffs and said nothing. Nobody knew what he had in his mind. "I want everyone to launch ranged attacks at Fort Lasberg. They will have to spend several tens of thousands of black crystal coins just to block a single wave of our attack. Let's see just how many waves of our attacks those energy crystal towers can resist," snickered Hoffs. The Divine Guards of Hushville City started using their divine energy and divine weapons to launch ranged attacks at Fort Lasberg. The colorful divine energies shot towards the fort like meteor showers. "Refill those crystals. When those bastards get inside, they are going to loot all the energy crystals in the energy towers. Do not leave a single piece of the crystals for them," shouted Gilbert as he moved the sparkling energy crystals into the energy towers with the Divine Guards of the House of Han. Chapter 879. Burning Crystal Coins, Chapter 879. Burning crystal coins, as Gilbert shouted and commanded, he joined the Divine Guards in flushing crystal coins down the toilet, refilling the energy crystals in those energy towers. He said to himself, "Fucking hell, each piece of these is worth 3,000 black crystal coins. How fucking extravagant." The House of Han was using energy crystals of the highest concentration and purity. These energy crystals could provide a tremendous amount of power for the energy crystal cannons and energy barrier. Although the defenders had managed to kill more